cemetery and check out the new directory. There are a few finishing touches to be added, and it's a very nice addition to our cemetery. The directory is up to date and complete with additions of newly found burials. If you see additions or corrections that need to be made, please let me know. So many stories in our Lady of Lourdes cemetery, and I will share a very short one. Did you know that in 1894, a tornado, or cyclone it was called then, struck in Afton Township? An old couple by the name of Michael and Rosa Shatek took shelter in their home, but their home was destroyed, and the 64-year-olds were the victims. And according to the Iowa Archives, they are buried in the Our Lady of Lourdes Cemetery, but we have no idea where. That's just one of the stories. There's many. And this is just some advice for if there's any kids here or even older people. Make sure that you listen to everything your grandma and grandpa tells you. Write it down, because one day they won't be there to tell it anymore. And sometimes you've got to tell a story the long way, because the details matter. You just can't say that, oh, Grandma made sweet tea. No. You got to tell them how she stirred it with a butter knife in a washed-out mayonnaise jar, big enough to baptize a baby. You can't just say my grandma got dressed. No. You had to explain how he pressed his pants, shined his shoes, and even if he wasn't going anywhere, always tucked in his shirt, because that showed pride in their name. And yes, this is a biggie. Ketchup did come in glass bottles, and you had to smack it just right to get the ketchup moving, because patience was part of the process. So, slow down, pull up a chair, and let somebody else tell it. Our storytellers today are the Flaherty kids, John, Jody, and Joy Lee, and I think John is going to be the one that's doing the speaking. Then we're going to have Dan Shatek and his sister Ruth Shatek Cooney. They're going to do Vince and Anna Shatek. Then Josiah Freidhof and his aunt, did I got that right? His Aunt Janessa Freidhof Hoffman are telling the story of their grandparents, Jean and Gert Freidhof. And finally, Brad and Jeff Freidhof, my sons, and George's sons, will be sharing the story of their grandfather, Vince Freidhof. So settle in, listen, and begin remembering and writing down your family stories. John?
So, my name is John Flaherty. Thank you, Julie. On this, the 150th celebration of the founding of Lourdes, as we began working on this, we thought it'd be nice to honor the Flaherty family as it goes back several generations. Flahertys were among the first members of our community here in Lourdes. So it's an honor also with them to celebrate the life of my dad, Tom Flaherty. So as we begin, the first generation began with Michael Flaherty and Bridget Conley. Michael Flaherty was born the day after Christmas in 1835 in Brandy Harbor, Lettermore, Galloway, Ireland. He immigrated to the United States as a teenager and settled in what is now Lourdes, Iowa, around 1860. Bridget Conley, born in Richmond, Virginia in 1840, was educated in Baltimore and moved to Iowa with her family in 1854. In 1861, Michael Flaherty married Bridget Conley. Their children were John H. Sr., James, Margaret, Thomas, Edward, Mary, Frank, Elizabeth, Clement, Bernard, Rose. Now I'd like you all to repeat that. Just kidding, I don't think I could without my notes. So Michael was a well-known and respected pioneer of Howard County, and he served as a postal worker and county deputy for Crane Creek and was actively involved in local government and the county supervisor's board. He was especially remembered for his hospitality and warm character. He passed away in 1894 during a return visit to Leavenworth, Ireland, and he was buried here back home in Lourdes. A quote from an 1894 newspaper article announcing Michael's death read, "He was esteemed by all his neighbors for his honesty, integrity, and nobility of character." Bridget was known for her strength. And just a second. You know, when you do this with technology, and you hit the wrong button. Let's see. That was just my bad helping me out there. Okay, so anyway, so Bridget was known for her strength and pioneering spirit. She managed the homestead and left a lasting impression in the community. She passed away in 1917 in her daughter's home near Waller, Iowa. Both Michael and Bridget were praised as pillars of the early Iowa settlement life. Their legacy also included the donation of land, which was used for a country school located near the creek, near the southeast end of the current Flaherty farm. For the second generation, John Flaherty Sr. and Mary Waller. John H. Flaherty Sr. was born March 29, 1862, one of Michael and Bridget's sons. John was a carpenter and a farmer, and he met Mary Waller, who was born in 1874 here in Lourdes. John and Mary were married in 1900 in Fresco, and together they had 3 children, William, John Leslie, and James. James, as was said at Mass this morning, James was the first recorded birth in the St. Mary's Parish, which is now Our Lady of Lourdes. James died in early childhood. John Sr. passed away in 1942, and Mary then lived with her son Willie on his farm, which is was just east of the current Flaherty farm, across the field. Mary deeded much of the property to her children, which my sister and I saw in the courthouse, a different way of keeping records, for the price of $1 and love and affection. And I joke because love and affection must have been pretty expensive. But Mary passed away in 1955, and both are buried here in the Lourdes Cemetery. So, third generation would be my grandfather and grandmother, John Leslie Flaherty and Mildred Nybauer. John was born in 1901, continuing the farming tradition of his family. In October of 1933, he married Mildred Nybauer, whose parents, Frank and Abby, raised their family directly across the road right here on the corner, just north of the front doors of the church. John and Mildred raised 5 children: Lorraine, Catherine, Dorothy, Tom, and Robert. An interesting detail in the history of the family home place where our mom is today, it includes the origin of the current house that is there. The original house was previously used as a KC Hall and then was relocated to the current site. The original family homestead, before that was done, stood about 50 yards east of the present barn. The fourth generation would be my dad Thomas and Kay Flaherty. Thomas John Flaherty was born to John and Mildred on September 1st, 1943. He attended grade school at Our Lady of Lourdes and went on to graduate from Cresco High School in 1961. After graduation, Tom began working at Oliver's in the bullpen at Charles City. In addition to working at Oliver's, Tom helped his family daily. His parents working with milking cows, farm chores, field work. Along with helping John and Mildred, he also helped his Uncle Willie, who lived just across the field to the northeast of the current farm. Milking cows, working the land, helping whenever needed, instilled in him a deep love and pride for the home place that stayed with him his entire life. Of course, he also found time to hang out at Hank's Cafe, the bowling alley, driving his 1963 Impala, which was always spotless. Tom married Kay Gardner in 1964, and together they raised 5 children: Jerry, Jeff, John, Jody, and Joey. They moved their family to the current farm in 1977, and together they operated the farm, milking cows, raising pigs, sheep, laying hens, and they also butchered chickens each summer, selling them locally. Tom was a hard-working man who blended family life with farm work. He often brought us kids along, involving us in the barn chores and the field work. And he found small ways to connect with us by helping us learn math facts during mealtime, setting the kids up on the cows, the tame ones, and especially letting us have the last sips, which I think is kind of icky, but the last sips of his cold Pepsi, which he pulled out of the milk cooler in the milk room. The bottles were tied to a twine string. We'd pull them up, and we always got to be the ones. We'd watch Dad as he got to that last bit at the bottom of the bottle. Like I said, kind of gross now. Anyway, Tom also worked for 26 years, 1980 till his retirement in 2006, as a mechanic and bus driver for Harvard Michigan School District. Known for his humor and dedication, I guess especially his humor, he would every year make Thanksgiving memorable by gobbling like a turkey over the two-way radio, so that everyone in the country could hear gobble like a Tom turkey. It became a little something that all the drivers in the community expected right around that time. Tom had a lifelong passion for tractors, especially Alice Chalmers, which, by the way, it's an honor to wear his shirt today. I don't necessarily look good in orange, but here it is. He enjoyed displaying every year up to 20 real tractors in his yard for the annual Lourdes steeplebase. He also had nearly 1,000 toy models of tractors and other implements. He also enjoyed roadside tractor stops. See a random tractor in somebody's yard, drive up and talk to them about it. He loved toy shows and tractor parades, and he always flew his orange AC flag proudly in the deck at the house. As a nod to his Irish bohemian heritage, Tom enjoyed his poppy seed roll-a-king, kolaches of any kind, and in fact, as kids, we were all rocked in Dad's green leather recliner to a Bohemian child song. Now, do we have any Bohemians? A couple, or some that aren't admitting it. But you may know this song. I'm going to try my best just to sing the first line. But it went something like, Kobe, cookish, schnelle, Kobe. Anyone? Never mind. We all loved it. He was a lover of black licorice, cinnamon bears, orange jelly candies, and our mom's custom Alice Chalmers orange cake. Saturday outings, tractor talk, and in his later years, he became a little softer, a little less rough on the edges, you might say, and became more open with his feelings, saying things like, we would say, love you, Dad. He would say, I love you more. And we would then say, I love you most. And he would say, oh, you got me. Tom died April 17th, 2020. He leaves a legacy of strong work ethic, family pride, and farming tradition. And he's survived by 5 children, Jerry, Jeff, John, Jody, and Joey. He is also survived by 9 grandchildren. And as a new grandpa myself, just in the last couple weeks, he is now survived by 1 great-grandson, the newest member, the 6th generation of the Flaherty family, Theodore Thomas Flaherty, born July 12, 2025, continuing a family name of Flaherty, hopefully well into the future. And it was a pleasure sharing this with you today. We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Anna Shatek, and I live about 3 miles south of town. And I'm going to talk about my grandpa Vince. And I'm going to talk as though I am Vince. That's the way I wrote this anyway. My name is James Vincent Shatek, but I like to go by Vince. My parents are Henry and Mary Shatek. I am the oldest of 8 siblings. I'm going to start with my homeland and family. In 1905, Bohemia was part of the Austria-Hungary Empire. We suffered from low wages, high taxes, and limited employment. Dad wanted a better life for us. So in April 1905, we left Bohemia for Bremen, Germany. We boarded the ocean liner SS Brislow May 4th and arrived at Baltimore May 18th. From Baltimore, we took trains to Saginaw, Michigan. Saginaw was a major hub for the coal mining industry and drew many immigrants. While in Saginaw, Dad worked at a foundry, I worked at a mill, and my brother Henry Jr. worked as a baker. In 1912, we heard about the land rush in Texas. Dad thought, this might be a good opportunity for us, so he decided to move the family to Texas. In the meantime, Frank, a family friend from Bohemia, had 2 farms in Iowa by Lourdes and lost a son and could use some help. He had come to work in 1884. So in 1912, everyone but John, 15, my brother, and I, 21, moved to Texas. John and I moved to Lourdes to help Frank on his farms. Dad and the family ran a farm while Henry Jr. was a baker in Texas. In 1922, Hormel in Austin, Minnesota needed workers and offered high wages to get them. So in 1922, because of the high wages, and I was looking at the 1920 census down there, and I saw Henry listed all the kids as helpers, so I'm wondering if it wasn't, I'm thinking it might have been a vegetable farm, but of course I don't know, but whatever the reason, the wages at Hormel looked better than what he was doing, so he moved the family up to Austin, Minnesota. Dad took a job at Hormel. John left me in Lourdes and took a job at Hormel also at that time. John and Dad both worked at Hormel, as far as I know, till they retired. Dad and Mom are buried in Oakwood Cemetery House in Minnesota. John and his wife are buried in St. Peter's Cemetery, Rose Creek, Minnesota. For the sake of time, I won't go into the rest of the family. Now, about me, that's what I was supposed to talk about anyway, but now, I was born September 21st, 1891 in Simcoe, Bohemia. Came to the U.S. in 1905 to Saginaw, about 14 years old. In 1912, moved from Saginaw to Lourdes to work for Frank on one of his farms. While looking for in the field, did it work? And Wes held up a stringer of fish. Looking up old newspapers, clippings can give a snapshot of Vince and his lifestyle. Vince went last Thursday to Alabama for coal, still talking his name there. Vince took a load of boats to Alabama with money to have ground. Vince is the proud possessor of an overland car. But my favorite one, Vince, Anna, Josephine Shatek went to Lourdes last Tuesday afternoon for grocery supplies, plastilad, and hammers. Entertainment was scarce in rural Iowa at that time. Plastilad and hammers makes one wonder if after getting their supplies, they didn't go to the pub and get plastered and hammered. Back to being Vince now. Like I said, I'm happy my parents brought us to the U.S. In 1914, World War I broke out. I would have been 23 years old. Bohemia was controlled by the Austria-Hungary, which was part of the Central I wonder how different my life would have been, or if I would have even survived the trench and chemical war if I hadn't come to the U.S. I continued farming to 1945, when suffering from heart trouble, we moved to Austin, Minnesota to live with our daughter, Angela. I turned the farm over to my son, Wesley, and his wife, Irene. In 1948, I suffered a severe stroke from which I never fully recovered. On September 10th, 1951, I died at the age of 59, and I am buried in the Lourdes Cemetery next to Anna.
Good afternoon. I'm Vince Shatek, and I grew up in this area. I went to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic School, but moved away shortly after graduating from high school. So I am very honored to come back here and share the story of my grandmother Anna. And just like Dan, I will be telling this story from first person. So here goes. Hello, I'm Anna Josephine Shatek. I was born in Gert Freidhof, Bohemia on February 12, 1880, to Frank Shatek and Mary Voina. In 1884, when I was just 4 years old, my father, mother, 2 sisters, and I left Hamburg aboard the Rugia, a Norwegian ship, on our way to the United States. So let's step back just a second because I thought this was really interesting. This is a ticket of passage aboard the Rugia, the Norwegian steamship. And it says 1884. It's a voyage from Hamburg, Germany to Ellis Island. The passengers on board, Mr. Frank, Mrs. Mary, and their 3 daughters. The payor is Mrs. Mary Voina's family. The fare, it was in US dollars, $20 to $30 per person. And the estimated voyage duration, 43 to 90 days, dependent on the weather at sea. And then they list the provisions. So they had 20 pounds of hard bread, 8 pounds of butter, 24 pounds of meat, 10 pounds of salted pork, 1 small cake of herring, 20 pounds of ground barley, a half bushel of pearl barley, 1/4 bushel of dried peas, 3 pounds of coffee, 2.5 pounds of syrup. Now for some of us, we probably don't even know what to do with some of these things, but that's what was on the ship. And it said, passengers should bring water pails, cooking pots, and utensils to prepare your own food in the ship's galley. Kegs of beer with very low alcohol content are recommended for travel. It keeps longer and offers calorie during the voyage. So they'll be back in the casino, so that's just kind of interesting. So now back to Anna's story. The sails on the ship were huge. I kept a brave face, but it was scary at times for me. I was only 4. We would hold on tight when the ship would rock as it crashed against the waves of the ocean. When we arrived at our new location, we were at Ellis Island, New York. My parents decided to just continue their travels and their journey, and they ended up settling in Iowa, where they began to build their future. My father, Frank, he was a strong man. He was born in 1849. He died in 1913. My mother, Mary Voina, was born in 1843, died in 1926. And they were married in 1872 at the ages of 23 and 29, respectively. I had 2 sisters that were born in Bohemia. They traveled with us on that big ship. Mary was the eldest. She was born in 1874. Frances was the middle daughter, born in 1875. Until 1885, I was the baby of the family, and my dad was surrounded by all girls. That all changed when my brother Frank was born in 1885 in Iowa. And then on October 8th, 1888, just 3 years later, my youngest brother, Joseph Lawrence, was born, and that completed our family. So you can imagine how happy my dad must have been to have someone help around the farm. The boys were a great help with farming chores. So one day, my brother Frank, who was then aged 15, he was sent into town. He was driving a milk wagon from the farm, and a thunderstorm rolled into the area. The unthinkable happened, and Frank was struck by lightning. He died on July 19, 1900. He is buried here in the Lourdes Cemetery with our original last name, Shatek. It was spelled S-A-T-E-K. My parents worked very hard to establish their farm to take care of the children. Just as we were all starting our own lives as adults, my father passed away on January 14, 1913. He missed my marriage to Vincent by just 1 year because we were married the following year in February of 1914. Vincent and I acquired 100 acres of land, and my mother and brother moved across the road from us and farmed there. So this original farmstead is about 3.5 miles to the south. And just as an aside, my brother Don and his wife Tina live on our family farm at this time. And Shatek family lives across the road still to this day as well. They're cousins. Anyway, this homestead, back to Anna's story. This homestead is where my Vincent and I lived, and we raised our 3 children. Angeline Marie was the firstborn. She was born on Christmas Day, and we always said she was our little Christmas gift. Our second daughter was Helen Lillian, born in 1919, and 2 years later, a baby boy, July 11th, 1920, named Wesley Francis. All 3 of my children attended the District 6 Township Harris Howard County School. They graduated 8th grade and could have gone to high school, but were needed to help on the farm. So when each of them were around the age of 14, they had completed their education and began to work. As the children grew, each began their own chapter. Angeline Marie was 22 years old, preparing to marry Russell Northness. That wedding took place on September 14, 1938. They had one daughter named Angeline Marie. They lived on a farm near Elma, Iowa before moving to Austin, Minnesota. Their story includes a moment of faith and tradition that has become part of our family lore. When Angeline gave birth to her baby daughter, the baby was having some problems. So the aunt, fearing for the baby's life, decided she must be baptized right away. Not knowing what name to use and with no time to ask, she baptized the baby using her mother's name, Angeline Marie, thinking that the name could always be changed later. But Angeline, steadfast in her faith, said, "No, what is presented to God, I cannot change." And so the daughter remained Angeline Marie, which is a testament to both their circumstance and her strong conviction. Only a year after Angeline was married, my second daughter, Helen Lillian, married Cletus Hegel in 1939. Helen was 21 years old. They farmed near Riceville and had 4 daughters, Beverly, Nancy, Connie, and Joyce. My only son and the youngest of the family, Wesley Francis, married Irene Teresa Hackman on May 29, 1945. He was 25 years old. The 2 of them went on to have 10 children: Robert, Ruth, Lester, Jane, Norma, Roger, Dan, James, Donald, and Randy. After Wesley was married, he and Irene lived on the family homestead with us until Vincent and I decided to sell our land to him so that he could start his life with his new wife, just as our parents had done before us. So in 1946, we moved to Austin, Minnesota, where Angeline now lived, and much of Vincent's family was located there. Angeline's husband had sadly died the year before, on June 28, 1945, so this presented a good opportunity for us to live with her. But the heartbreak kept coming, as only 3 years after we moved, my dear Vincent had a stroke. He struggled for 2 years before passing away in 1951. As for me, throughout my life I loved to cook. Potato dumplings and apple strudel were a couple of my favorites. The kitchen was my space, and everyone knew it. I always told everyone, Grandma's kitchen is Grandma's kitchen. I also liked to make my own soap from pig lard. And my not-so-secret to fresh clothes and healthy plants was to put a large bucket out when it would rain. I'd use the rainwater for washing clothes and watering my plants. My Vincent, he was just the wisest man I knew. He would always say, "We have very little, but we have everything we need." These stories of courage, faith, and love are the legacy we leave, and I'm grateful to share them with you. I died on November 15, 1970. I am buried right here in the Lourdes Cemetery, next to my sweet Vincent, and surrounded by my family.
Go back there, and we have the pictures of their hometowns from Bohemia. And they're small towns, and we got a picture of the church of each. So we're assuming that's when they would have been baptized. There's pictures, old pictures too, that we have there. Oh, and a picture of Bohemia. And the location, we put a yellow dot where we think it about Simba would be from Prague. And then we have a blown up map that shows both old towns. And then we highlighted Proven there, because there's a town named Proven there, so it's that table back there.
Thank you.
The Things That Last, a story in the voice of Eugene Freidhof. You know, I never thought much about history while I was living it. Back then, we were too busy trying to get through the day, especially on the farm. But now, looking back, I see it was history after all. I was born in 1925, the youngest boy in a big family that had already seen its share of hard times and hard work. Our farm, just outside of Iowa, came into the family in 1885. My grandparents, Valentine and Margaret, were the first to settle, and they passed it down to my parents, Joe and Marie. It stayed in the family even during the meanest years, though for a short time, my Uncle Leonard held it. I suppose you could say it was never just land. It was a legacy. From our farm, we could always see the steeple of Our Lady of Lourdes Church. It stood like a compass, pointing the way through seasons, storms, and years. The parish was the center of our life, but I won't pretend I was ever a scholar. I went to the Our Lady of Lourdes school through 8th grade. When it burned down in 1938, I still remember standing with my siblings watching the smoke rise, the steeple visible from the fields. And I'll admit, we quietly rejoiced. It felt like our school days might be over. For a boy like me, who always had his hands in the dirt, that wasn't the worst thought in the world. Formal education was never my path. My kind of learning came from fixing broken things, setting traps, building contraptions, and making do with what we had. After that, well, duty called. Not to war like my older brothers, but to the soil. All three of them, Ray, John, and Vince, went off to serve in World War II. Jim was already married and off the farm, and I stayed behind to help my folks run the family farm. It wasn't a choice, really. It It was just what had to be done. Everyone did what they could. I had to take a long bus ride to Minneapolis, Minnesota, to register for the draft, and it was with a hardship letter from my dad, Joe, asking that he be allowed to have one of his sons stay back to assist in the day-to-day work on the farm. That was how I got my war crime assignment, to help keep the home place running. The Depression had already taken its toll on families across Iowa and the country. Banks were foreclosing and taking land back like they owned it all along. Neighbors were losing everything, but we hung on by the grace of God and the strength of our family. My sister Florence, God bless her, helped us keep the farm afloat by making payments on the taxes when there was no money coming in. She was a teacher, and her paycheck was small, but she sent what she could. Without her, we might have lost everything. We owed a lot to her quiet sacrifices. I worked sun up to sundown, milking cows, fixing equipment, tending crops, and praying the hail and droughts would pass us by. We didn't have much, but we made do. I learned early that perseverance isn't about glory. It's about getting up every morning and doing what needs to be done, no matter how tired you are. Eventually, when the war ended and my brothers came back, I stayed on the farm. Farming wasn't just a job for me, it was my calling. I married, raising a family, and lived out my days on the same land I walked barefoot as a boy. Now, there was one time I did leave the farm for something that mattered. Love. My brother Raymond had married a girl from over in Alta Vista, a little ways off, in the next town and county over. Her name was Alice, and she had a sister, Gertrude. That's how I met my Gert. We went on a few dates, usually me rattling with her down the road in my old Model A Ford truck. One fall evening, with winter closing in and the roads about to turn to ice and mud, I told her, "Well, I'll see you in the spring." I figured it might be months before I could make the trip again, but I couldn't wait that long. I was back the very next weekend. My heart had other plans. That winter, we exchanged love letters, dozens of them. I wrote her as best as I could, with my 8th grade education and a heart full of hope. She kept those letters for decades, tucked away like a treasure. Toward the end of her life, in the late 90s, our grandson begged her to keep them. But Gert, always protective of our privacy, and maybe a little embarrassed of my spelling, sat by the fire one last time, read them all, and then tossed them into the flames. She later told him she regretted that. But in truth, I think she knew those words had already done their work. They built a life, and it was a good life, quiet, humble, rooted. We married in 1949, and I came back to the family farm with my new bride. Though eventually we moved off the farm for a couple years, living next to the old high bridge and railroad south of Alta Vista, but not for long. We returned home to the family farm for good, ultimately buying it in 1957. I wasn't a man with a wandering spirit. I lived my life within a few counties, 2 to be exact, and that suited me just fine. I ventured to Minnesota and Wisconsin a handful of times, but I never felt easy being far from home. I remember once visiting my son's family in Wisconsin for a single night. I was only 4 hours from Iowa, but I felt sick and anxious being away from the land. It wasn't just nerves. I think it was the deep ache of separation from the soil that raised me and my responsibility to take care of it. People didn't come to me for advice or storytelling, but they came when there was work to be done. The one to call when a tree needed cutting. I'd come with a saw, cut it down, and split the wood. I burned wood my entire life, never switching to anything fancier, even when we built the new house in 1978. I was also known for building contraptions. Nothing fancy, just practical. I was a neighborhood trapper, from raccoons and skunks to woodchucks and possums. But my favorite was driving pocket gophers all over the countryside, earning a 50-cent bounty for a pair of paws, and especially focused on waging a quiet war on the ones that tunneled through the cemetery. That cemetery, Our Lady of Lourdes, I cared for it like it was part of the farm. I mowed, trimmed, and picked up windblown flowers. And for many years, I helped dig nearly every grave by hand, alongside a few good men with a spade and dump wagon. We laid to rest our neighbors, friends, and priests. It was solemn work, but it mattered, and we took tremendous pride in making sure the measurements were perfect, and the lines cut deep and the soil was sharp. Even in later years, I stayed true to my ways. I caught rainwater off the roof, filtered it myself, and washed my work clothes with a series of old ringer washers I rigged up in the old hog house. My own laundry. KOBL AM 950 played on transistor radios and salvaged from thrift stores, auctions, and garage sales. Always crackling with weather reports, market prices, and voices that kept me company. It was a soundtrack of the farm. Frugality wasn't a choice for me. It was in my bones. I couldn't be wasteful. That depression mindset never left me. It taught me what it meant to almost lose everything. I never forgot, and I never stopped preparing for it to happen again. I didn't care much for fancy things, but I cared deeply for useful ones. I collected what might one day serve a purpose. More than once it did. I collected cans from the ditches for nickel deposits and held on to things other folks would throw away. Not because I liked clutter, but because you never knew when something might be useful. If you remember me for anything, don't picture a man with big speeches or grand adventures. Picture a man in the field, listening to a crackling radio, boots muddy, callous hands full of tools. Picture someone who knew how to build, fix, and reuse, who dug graves by hand, who picked up cans from ditches and never left woodwood flowers to litter the cemetery. Picture a man who stayed close to home, not because he was afraid, but because he understood the value of tending the little patch of earth entrusted to him. I believe in doing the job right. I believe in honoring the past, stewarding the land, and using what you had before asking for more. I believe in service to my family, to my church, to the community, and to the 5 places where people are remembered. Some people chase the wide world. Me, I stayed and took care of the little corner of the world I was given. I wasn't meant to roam. I was meant to stay, meant to take root. And that is exactly what I did until my death, one day after my 54th wedding anniversary in June of 2003. Thank you.
My name is Vince Freidhof, and Jean and Gert were my grandparents, and this story is Gert's story told in her voice. Our lives are shaped by the foundations of those who came before us, the love, faith, and hardships carried by my parents and generations before them became the stones upon which my own story was built. I stood on the strength of their sacrifices, their prayers, and their hope. My life and this story is built on that same foundation: faith, family, hard work, and love, passed down, lived out, and hopefully handed on. I was born January 22nd, 1928 at my parents' home, 3 miles west and a quarter mile south of Alta Vista. I was baptized at St. Bernard's Catholic Church in Alta Vista, where I later made my first confession, first communion, was confirmed, and eventually married. I was given the name Gertrude Anna Josephine Shatek. I was the 8th child of 11 children born to Henry and Elizabeth Wolfhouse Shatek. My youngest sister, Geneva, was born May 11th, 1932, and died June 23rd, 1933. I don't remember much about her, but I have very faint memories of the funeral. Alice and I didn't go to the funeral, but I remember somebody wrapping me in a blanket and taking me downstairs to see her in the coffin, right in our living room. My parents, Ma and Pa, were good, hardworking people, not without their fair share of suffering and hardship. They even tried their hand at homesteading on the South Dakota prairie. I never lived there, but I love their stories, how they traded with Native Americans and once were asked for a puppy to make puppy soup. Can you imagine? Growing up, everything had value. A string of twine, an old pair of denim jeans, or a flour sack. You saved it because someday you might need it. That habit stayed with me all my life. I kept everything from my grandfather's trunk from Germany to a tiny porcelain dog I got from a Cracker Jack box in the 1930s. I was just prepared. Fire was always a fear of mine. The home place burned to the ground before I was born, twice, back to back, in April 1925 and June 1926. Every building but the house was gone. That kind of loss haunts you. And my parents always talked about it. I never got over it, and all my life I unplugged everything. Not just the same electricity, but because you never knew what might spark. Later on, Jean would be yelling for me to get in the basement for a tornado warning while I was unplugging the TV and shutting the windows. At home, we had a really big rock in our house. It was quite the novelty. We spent lots of time climbing and playing on it, and I remember dumping a pie that was a complete flop behind it. I don't remember what I did wrong, but it definitely wasn't fit to eat, so I went behind the big rock. The house is long gone now, but the big stone still stands there. I did love to visit my sisters, and once when we were in our 70s and 80s, Sis and I climbed the big rock at the old home place, just to prove we still could, giggling and bones creaking. We teased Agnes like we were kids again, and for a little while, we were. In the fall of 1934, I started school at St. William's School in Alta Vista. I did not like school, and I spent a lot of time crying, not wanting to go, but of course I had to anyways. I went to St. William's for all 12 years. One winter, I remember going to school in a sled, pulled by our mules, Jack and Jimmy. I had to sit in the sled box all covered over with quilts and hot bricks to keep warm. Those mules were pretty smart. When the boys thought they weren't going fast enough, one of them would get out, make like he was getting a switch from the ditch, and then the mules would see this and take off like crazy. The guy with the switch had a hard time getting back on the sled. We carried our own lunches, and on the first Friday of each month, we fasted from midnight to morning mass. We would bring extra food in our lunch pails for our post-communion breakfast. First Fridays became a lifelong part of my spiritual life. We never had much candy or sweets, but when Ma or Pa, there was usually a sack of candy in the box for us kids. It had to be divided very carefully and evenly, or there would be, he got more than I did. We did our fair share of fighting, teasing, and bickering, and I'm not sure how Ma could stand it. After I was married and had my kids so close together, the fighting and disagreements about drove me nuts some days, but with the help of God, we lived through it. Near the end of the school year, each classroom had a picnic at a nearby park. There were games, a sack lunch, maybe a food pop, a real treat. In summer, Mom cut the sleeves off our old uniforms so we could wear them out at home. I graduated from high school on June 9th, 1946. We didn't have caps and gowns, but I did have a new dress that I had. After graduation, I worked for a few neighbors, earning $2 a day. I was the only one left at home, so eventually I just helped on the farm. I did washing, gardening, and all kinds of things for Mom, and everything had to be ironed. There were no TVs, but we did have a radio that ran off a battery that had to be taken to town to have it recharged. An electric radio was the second appliance we got after an electric iron. And a few years after that, we got a refrigerator. We were a large family, and we didn't have much money. My mom did a lot of canning from her big garden with rows and rows of potatoes. Pa kept bees for honey, too. We did our own butchering, and it took a week or more to get the meat all put away. Mom made all kinds of sausage. It was really good. Butchering was a lot of work, and I always hated it because it was a greasy, messy job, but it had to be done. On my first date with Jean, we went to a dance in Acme with my sister Alice, who was going with Jean's brother Ray at the time. We started going steady after Ray and Alice got married in 1947. And at Christmas 1948, we got engaged and were married June 7th, 1949 at St. Bernard's. The reception was held at my parents' home. That afternoon, we had to go to Cresco and have a picture taken. That evening, we had a dance at the hall in Alta Vista where Dwayne's accordion band played. Guests had to present their invitation card at the door. If they didn't have a card, they had to pay to get in. The next day, we came up to the farm we now live on. Jean went right to work farming, and I helped with the milking, chickens, gardening, and everything else where help was needed. We had an old 1929 Ford pickup. That's what Jean drove when we were going out together. And boy, you know for sure it wasn't his car or his money I married him for. It had to be love, and I never regretted it. We lived in the old house with his folks. We lived in 2 semi-private rooms until December 1951. And Jean worked the farm with his dad on shares. 50-50. We didn't have a very big income on a farm of 120 acres, and then only getting half of it. On October 5th, 1950, we became the parents of baby boy Richard Eugene, born at the hospital in New Hampton, Iowa. We then rented a 110-acre farm south of Alta Vista. The railroad ran just a few feet from the house. We did well, and God blessed us with good luck, good crops, and with another baby boy on January 23rd, 1952, Michael John. It was 22 below zero the day we brought him home from the hospital. There was an old wood furnace in the basement with just one register in the floor above. Jean would saw up old railroad ties by hand, and we bought coal or burned corn cobs, and were able to keep the house warm and healthy. As I said, God blessed us abundantly with good luck, good health, and a baby girl on April 2nd, 1953, Elizabeth Ann. Now a family of 5, I helped outside with the hand milking, the chickens, and as much as I could. Jean always helped me with the washing and everything he could. I had to wash twice a week for sure because I had 3 babies in diapers, and those days we had no disposable diapers. We always had a big garden, canning for the winter. We bought some machinery and saved a little money, and Jean was able to buy his home place in the fall of 1907. We paid $150 an acre for it, and at that time it was a lot of money, but we paid it off in a few years. On July 5th, 1958, we were again blessed with another baby boy, David Francis. We didn't know it at the time, but that was to be our last one. We didn't move for another year after we bought the farm, so we worked both farms in 1958. In February 1959, there was a lot of snow and the driveway was bugged, and we had to come in through the west field. It was a lot of hard work to move, especially the cattle, which we left out at the end of the driveway and then herded into the shed where we milled before we built the new barn in 1962. I didn't move far from my home in life, just 3 places: my home place, the rented farm, and Jean's family farm, which became my adored home for over 60 years after we bought it. Occasionally, I would take a bank or farm bureau bus tour somewhere in Iowa, Wisconsin, or Minnesota, and in later years, I made a few visits to Colby, Wisconsin, to see Dave and his family. I always wanted to go visit them when they moved to Ohio, but it was so far away that I never made it there. And thankfully, they moved back closer after just 3 years. For someone like me, these short trips were adventurous enough. Jean and I were partners in everything. I meticulously kept the books, cooked, and raised the children. I clipped coupons like it was a job. I keep separate grocery lists depending on which store we were going to: Lidl's, Fairway, Jack or Jill, or IGA. And I always knew where to get the best deal. Not because we were stingy, but because when you grow up in the Depression, you learn to make the most of every penny. A brat shared with Jean at the Howard County Fair, a yearly tradition, was just as good as a steak at a fancy restaurant, probably better. I cooked daily: roast chickens, potatoes, corn, or vegetables, and always dessert. Pie, cake, cookies, or bars, usually some combination. And I followed the rules too. On Good Friday, I'd make vanilla sandwich cookies, but wouldn't dare lick the spoon. Fasting meant fasting from even the taste. I guess that is faith, knowing they were delicious without even trying them, before they were even sampled. Faith was everything. I prayed the rosary multiple times a day, and I worried. Oh, how I worried. If worrying had been a paying job, I'd have been a millionaire. But it was out of love and due care. When something was out of my hands, I gave it to the Blessed Mother and prayed until I believed it would be okay. Or at least I wouldn't be alone in it. When my son Rick went to Vietnam, I prayed harder than I ever had in my life, wearing out rosaries in the process to make sure he came home safe, and he did. My family knows I swayed some other outcomes by these prayers as well. If I was praying against your desired outcome, you might as well not even try to pursue it anymore. Later in life, though I continued patching jeans and coveralls like a professional seamstress, I took up crafting and entered it at the county fair, or sold it at craft shows in far-off places like Spillville. I like to keep track of ribbons and prizes, even if I pretended I didn't care. Eventually, quilting became my focus, making them for raffles, for sale, for friends, for the missions, and for family. I made hand-quilted wedding quilts for every grandchild, and finished them all by 1999 just in case. I lived another 18 years, so I probably finished it a little too soon. After Jean passed away in 2003, I missed him something terrible and yearned for a reunion. I kept up the home and took special pride in having a well-trimmed lawn, partly because I was in a years-long friendly competition competition with our neighbor Mary. If I had mowed at midnight, Mary would have fired up her mower at 12:05. We never said it aloud, but we both knew. Jean's absence also led to my unexpected career as a local trapper. I set live traps at home and at the homes of the other neighborhood widows, my hair tied on a kerchief and toting my shotgun around to take care of the pests. It worked well, although once I did have to hide behind a tall, old arborvitae with Clara O'Neill, so as not to be seen by passing cars. We weren't crazy, just determined, but we didn't want to give the passerby a reason to think otherwise. I didn't live to see all my grandchildren married, but I made sure they all had something of me. Quilts, recipes, cards, and prayers. Always prayers. And on March 3rd, 2017, the Lord called me home. Fittingly, on the first Friday of Lent, nearly right at noon, the hour of our Lord's crucifixion. The promises of my lifelong devotion had always taught that faithful observance, including the promise of final perseverance and the assurance of a happy death. I guess the Lord kept his promise to me after all. Looking back, my life was never about doing something big by the world's standard, but about building something that could last. A good meal, a strong marriage, children raised to work hard, say their prayers, and love one another. Quilts stitched by hand, a faith that never wavered even when I did. Everything I built, every batch of black brownies, every whispered rosary, every carefully patched pair of jeans was part of the foundation. Not just for me, but for you, for those who came after. I didn't travel far from home, but my prayers did. They went with my children, my grandchildren, and anyone else who needed them. And that, I think, was enough. Jean and I didn't build an empire, but we built a home, a life, and a love that never gave up. We raised 4 good kids who gave us grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I see in them the same spirit that built our little world. Practical, prayerful, and a little stubborn when needed. I hope they always know what they came from. If there's anything I want you to remember, it's this. Foundations matter. The kind you lay with your hands, with your habits, and most of all, with your heart. I built mine on faith and family, layered with laughter, laced with sacrifice, and bound together with love. And if you ever feel uncertain or unsteady in the world, just plant your feet, say a prayer, and remember you were built on something solid.
Hello, my name is Gert Freidhof. I've learned so much about myself today, listening to all these stories of the village that raised us up here in Lourdes. My brother Jeff and I will be speaking on behalf of our grandfather Vince. I had a little lamb that I fed every day. I put him in a pen every night. When he grew bigger, I laughed at him because of the funny things he used to do. When I would go away, he would say, "Bah, bah," as his way of saying goodbye. We used to play hide and seek, but when he found me, he would chase me to the house. I hitched a wagon to him, and he gave me rides around the yard. At first, he didn't like that. Sometimes he would tip me over and I'd fall in the mud. Sometimes he would just run away and I'd have to go look for him. I missed him a lot when Daddy sold him. That was from Vince Freidhof, 3rd grade, Our Lady of Lourdes School. Mary Ellen Birmingham, a 10th grader at Lourdes, and I were published in the February 28, 1928, in the Archdiocese of Butte, The Witness. Who knew? I guess I was an author and a writer. Vince Freidhof, that's me. I'm the middle child of Joseph and Marie Freidhof, who lived west of Lourdes. In our family, there were bookend sisters, Florence, and the oldest, and Marie Catherine, the youngest. In between the 2 girls, there were 5 very rambunctious, adventurous boys. John, James, me, Raphael, and Jean, who you just heard about. I think we were the 5 boys who would all have to agree that Florence and Marie Catherine did a dang good job of keeping us all in line. We had another brother, Joseph, who died shortly after birth. We were a family of 9, plus Uncle Glenn Freidhof, who lived with us. My Freidhof grandparents were Valentine and Margaret Zygmunt Freidhof, early settlers of the Lourdes area, and today buried at Our Lady of Lourdes Church. My Lansing grandparents are John and Mary Winter Lansing, settlers in the Little Turkey, Riley Ridge, Waller area, where my mom grew up. Mom was the oldest daughter of 7 children. I was born on December 12, 1919, and I was baptized on December 19, 1919, by Father Rainier. My godparents are George and Mary Hegel. George was my dad's cousin. I received the holy sacraments of baptism, First Holy Eucharist, and confirmation, all from Father Rainier. There was no confusion about my name, well, until my death. Father Dunkel set our family straight. My baptismal records show my given name was George Vincent Freidhof, but everybody called me by my middle name, Vince. I always thought my name was Vincent George, and my parents never told me different. I was always called Vincent or Vince, so what do? I probably changed it, not legally, but I soon identified as Vincent George Freidhof. Then, when my oldest son was born, he was given the name George Vincent Freidhof, and he goes by George. Some of you might know him. My namesakes were great Uncle George Patrick Winter, Uncle George Patrick Lansing, and my dad's cousin, George Hegel. Lucky me, St. George was primarily known for slaying the dragon, and also the revered saint, patron saint of soldiers. Be it noted, I did have several dragons that I would need to slay in my lifetime. I praise God and St. George that I returned home safely from my tour of duty during World War II. During my teen years and even into my adult years, I loved hunting squirrels. One squirrel hunting Sunday adventure with my brother Ray, who was 12. I shot a squirrel, but the squirrel did not fall out of that tree, and it got caught. So I climbed that tree to retrieve that squirrel. I slipped when I reached for that dead squirrel, and I fell 25 feet to the ground, striking many branches on the way down. I knocked myself out. I mean, I really knocked myself out. Ray had to run 1.5 miles back to the house to tell my parents. My family rescue crew was on the way. I fell on a Sunday, and 24 hours later, I regained consciousness. Luckily for me, my Aunt Nellie Lansing Lynch was a nurse at New Hampton and visited the farm often to check up on my progress. Sometimes she even brought Uncle Leo. By the way, my accident even made the New Hampton newspaper. Thank you, Aunt Nellie. I attended elementary school in Lourdes and graduated from high school in 1936 at the age of 16 from Elma Immaculate Conception. My best friend was Richard Zapp, who also attended school in Lourdes and Elma. Richard is an electrician in Cresco. After high school, I worked for my brother John, who was an electrician in Elma. Does anybody remember Reddy Kilowatt? In 1935, the Rural Electrical Administration, the REA, was a government agency created to provide financial assistance for rural communities for electricity and other infrastructure projects. It played a key role in expanding electricity to rural areas, particularly in the formation and support of electrical cooperatives. It was a learning experience and a life skill that I used my entire life. It was in November of 1942 that I received my call to serve the country. This was difficult for my parents, as my brother Ray was already serving in the Navy, having entered on November 4th of 1942. Ray served from 1942 through 1946, starting his career training in Milford, Iowa, on West Okoboji Lake, and then the Great Lakes Naval Base. Ray's major deployment was at Hawaii and Pearl Harbor. My enlistment date was December 15th of 1942, and I was to report to Fort Campbell, a new Army base located in Kentucky. I was assigned to the service battalion of the 501st Armored Field Artillery Battalion. Shortly after my arrival at Fort Campbell, I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky to attend armor school. I was to take a special course in the wheeled vehicle department. The school trained thousands of officers and enlisted technicians in classes including tactics, gunnery, communication, driving and maintenance of tanks, wheeled vehicles, and motorcycles. I learned to drive and maintain Army vehicles, and specifically to drive a tank. The service battalion in which I belong provided essential support in logistics. Those tasks included vehicle maintenance, supply management, ensuring the operational readiness, supplying the battalion with fuel, ammunition, and other essential materials, providing first aid and medical care to soldiers in the battalion, managing personnel records, paperwork, and other administrative tasks. Maintenance, logistics, medical, and administration. Without the service battalion, or without the support of the service battery, the battalion would have struggled to maintain its equipment and supplies for its soldiers and to keep them healthy. On October 13th, 1943, my service battery was deployed in the European Theater of Operations, along with the 501st Battalion, AFA. The infantry traveled by train to New York City, while the service battery drove the vehicles. A ferry on the Hudson River took us to a pier adjoining the ship, Sea Robin, which was our transport to France. On October 29th, 1943, we dropped anchor outside our Marseille, France. The lights of the city were glowing brightly in the night, and all the soldiers were wondering just what lay ahead of us in that peaceful setting. The Nazis were looting and plundering churches, museums, art, and literature collections. They burned books, stole artworks, bombed, and destroyed architectural buildings. The U.S. military played a significant role in moving artworks primarily for two reasons: preservation and restitution. In the dead of the night, missions were set in action. Hitler's refusal to admit defeat led to widespread destruction of German infrastructure and further loss of life in the months of the war. Trekking down unknown roads to churches, museums, and the dead of night was very tricky as well as dangerous. It was necessary to drive very carefully down those narrow roads in the dark, maneuvering through the vacant streets of the cities and being as quiet as a convoy truck can be. Because there was no lights. Sneaking in and then sneaking out was tricky, but we did it. Talk about no lights. One maneuver, I drove my truck into a ditch and had to wait for the next vehicle to come along and help get us out in the dark. Oh my. Not such a wonderful adventures. We took the art and war collections to salt mines and caves, as the salt mines and caves were about as close to climate-controlled environments as we could get. Anyway, my military friends and I helped move and retrieve famous artworks to preserve and return them to the rightful owners. Yes, we were military monument men. Did you know that the death camps of Hitler were all located outside of Germany, so the dear leader could deny responsibility for them all? Auschwitz-Birkenau opened in 1940 and was the largest of the Nazi concentration camps and death camps located in southern Poland. Auschwitz initially served as a detention center for political servants, and Dachau initially was for internees who were primarily Germanist communists, social democrats, trade unionists, and other political opponents of the Nazi regime. But it was soon the concentration camp for Jehovah's Witnesses, the Roma, or Gypsies as many called them, gay men, as well as many asocial and repeat criminal offenders. They were in concentration camps in most of Europe. One sense became very acute in the war. Vivid sights of death, the smelling of the burning and thick smoke from the bombing, so much needless devastation and death. In one of my trips to a POW camp in Mossberg to transport free prisoners, John Gardner, POW prisoner from Elma, was on my truck. From what I heard, I was the first face that he saw, but I had no idea. I didn't recognize. My mom wrote many letters to Ray and I, but one letter carried very sad news. Our cousin Gert Freidhof had been killed in Belgium on Christmas Day, 1944. Jerome was 3 months older than I. His body was returned to Alta Vista on January 6, 1948 for reburial. Ray and I served as pallbearers while Gene was an honorary pallbearer, Jerome served with honor and gave his life for all. On November 10th, 1945, was my day of separation. I was glad to be going home to my friends and family, but the visions and the memories from my military time will haunt me forever. All the atrocious and still vivid in my mind as if they were today. One would think with time the veracity of these memories would diminish, but trust me, they did not.
Brad's younger brother. I'll pick up after the war. I met my future wife, Phyllis Mary Burke, at a dance in Alta Vista. If you wanted to meet a girl back then, you went to a dance. We were married on April 9th, 1947, at Immaculate Conception in Elma. It was also Phyllis's birthday. Good for me. Just one date to remember. I built a small 2-room house in Elma. We welcomed George to our family on March 8th, 1948, and Ron arrived on March 10th, 1950. After Ron's birth, we needed a bigger house, so we moved to a second-floor apartment in Elma. Later, we moved to an apartment on the first floor of a house close to Immaculate Conception Church. Kenneth was born on October 26, 1954, and it was a very difficult time for all of us. Kenneth was premature and weighed just 2 pounds and 12 ounces and lived for just 6 weeks, never leaving the hospital. Phyllis and I never allowed the boys to go to the hospital to see Kenneth. Maybe we should have. Questions were asked, and maybe we didn't do the best job of explaining. The 2 boys helped us to heal, but it was hard on them too. The boys helped us pick out a casket, and we were able to attend the funeral, not fully understanding the situation. Sometimes it was as if Georgie and Ronnie were blaming themselves for Kenneth's death. Kenneth was buried in Calvary Cemetery next to Phyllis's brother Joseph, who died in 1938. Nancy arrived in 1956, and Kathy made her interest in the family in 1958. Both were born prematurely and spent time in the Cresco Hospital. In 1957, we purchased the 80-acre Freddie Hillwell farm southeast of Lourdes. We were living on our farmstead with lots of trees and a low driveway that filled in with a light skim of snow. So industrious to me, I proceeded to move dirt to make the driveway higher. Well, needless to say, on one attempt, I tipped over the tractor with me on it. I severely cut my leg and blood was gushing everywhere. Back then, you didn't go to the doctor unless it was an emergency. Phyllis thought this was an emergency. Luckily, no broken bones, but several stitches and injured pride. No more moving dirt for a while. I had an old Model T that was my work truck. I would take out the back seat and haul whatever needed to be transported, such as field calves and hay. Those field calves rode and stopped. Once I got the calves home, early every morning before I went to work, I got up and fed them. One day after a long day of construction work, I fired up the Model T and started tooling from home. I can see men chuckling along the street in Alta Vista, who by the way called me Peaches, and then lo and behold, there was a highway patrolman. He proceeded to walk around my vehicle with his ticket pad and beginning to check, and check. Then he said, "Mr. Freidhof, I'm giving you 2 choices. Number 1, fix everything that is checked on the ticket, or number 2, park that Model T in your grove." I parked it in the grove. The boys did try once to get it going, but to no avail. I farmed for a little bit, but also worked for Auto Winds from Alta Vista doing carpentry work. During the off-season of construction, I worked at the Elma Locker. My children will attest that I did bring home some pig brains and Rocky Mountain oysters. I would season them and fry them in a good old-fashioned cast iron skillet. I always enjoyed the meal, but none of the family acquired the same taste as I. When George was young, just the 2 of us attended many fishing derbies at local fishing spots in the county. It was always a joy. The boys and I enjoyed fishing at Fisher's Pond along Crane Creek. It was close to home and a great Sunday afternoon trek. We were hunters too. The family ate a lot of squirrel, pheasant, and fish. It was a true blessing that Phyllis was a great cook and could make anything tasty. According to the kids, well, not everything. Brains and Rocky Mountain oysters excluded. Her egg noodles with beef were the best and staple at every holiday meal. George always hoped for leftover noodles. Phyllis also had a big garden and raised 100 chickens a year. George and Phyllis would butcher about 20 chickens per day. We also had a cow for milk, but learned very quickly the importance of pasteurization. The boys were small and thankfully didn't drink the raw milk, but for me, I got very sick. My mom called it milk fever from drinking the unpasteurized milk. Needless to say, this scare precipitated the purchase of a milk pasteurator for our family of 4. We were not rich, but survived on what God gave us. As the boys grew older, I volunteered as a 4-H leader with Colonel Hillwell, our neighbor. The club was Lourdes Trojans. The boys showed cattle and enjoyed the group activities at 4-H. My health began to deteriorate about the time that the boys left for college. George started at Iowa State in 1966 and Ron in 1968. They had summer jobs, so they didn't come home very often. When they did, it was a special time. Then the loss of my nephew Dennis in Vietnam and my brother John in 1970. Dennis was an age difference of 2 days with George, March 6th and March 8th. John and I had a close bond, and I was deeply saddened when they passed. Thus began a difficult time when memories of the war began to appear far too often. I didn't share much with anyone, just tried to keep the memories hidden. Guess what? That doesn't always work. Someone told me to buck it up. That just made it worse. Plus, alcoholism and medication are not a good mix. Appointments in Iowa City were frequent. One Christmas, when the boys came home for Christmas, Phyllis had the boys journey out into a snowstorm to bring me home for the holidays from the hospital. The weather was bad, and my sister Florence was not a happy camper that the boys went out in bad weather. She wanted to know, what were you thinking? No thinking involved. There were times when my life was a joy, while others were not so much. Time spent with my children, especially my boys, will always bring joy to my heart. George was teaching in Centerville, married in 1972. Ron working in the AIDS, married in 1973. And Nancy married in 1979. Phyllis and I were blessed with 4 grandchildren, Bradley, Melissa, Jeffrey, and Kelly. Grandchildren brought so much joy, love, and hope into my life. They were the apples of my eye. After my death, grandchildren Courtney, Marcy, Sean, and Riley arrived. On July 21st, 1979, I was called home. I was just 59 years old, taking a walk through the grove to no place where George, Julie, and the boys lived. My heart just gave up. However, my legacy still lives on. 4 children, 8 grandchildren, 18 great-grandchildren. Thanks to my grandson Bradley, there's another legacy to add to the Freidhof name. The small creek that runs through our farm has officially been named Freidhof Creek by the U.S. Board on Geographic Names. I'm going to read a little insert from the proposal that Brad wrote. I am writing to advise you about the U.S. Board Geographic Name process. Says to determine if there's support or opposition regarding the name of this body of water. As this stream only passes through our family farm and then enters the Crane Creek Wildlife Area, I'm not aware of anyone who would be in opposition to this naming. I would request the support of the Howard County Board of Supervisors in this request. It would specifically be named after my grandfather, Vince Freidhof, who purchased this farm in 1958. He was a World War II veteran and local farmer who purchased this farm in 1957. He was born in 1919 and passed in 1979. My original German ancestors, Valentin and Margaret Freidhof, are buried in the cemetery in Lourdes. There have been a lot of other Freidhofs who have contributed to the surrounding communities. The naming of the stream does not change anything about the classification, regulation, or anything related to the stream. I'd like to honor this small stream that pulled me into the outdoors and cemented my interest in conservation. Howard County has a lot of phenomenal natural resources, and I would be honored if the Howard County Board of Supervisors could support the naming and allowing my family to carry on this legacy into the future.